Welcome to the Life in Red podcast. This is a way of life that emphasizes positive sexuality, self-love, and confidence. On this journey, red is now your new color. Be courageous. Be passionate. Be sexy. And never stop living your best red life. So now I have one question for you. Are you ready to live your life in red? To join us on this journey, like and subscribe below.
Some are traumatic. Some people have childhood trauma, sexual trauma, things like that. So how we perceive our first time experiences, I'm just curious how that ripple affects.
It can be. It really is. So if your first time, we're going to stick to things that are consenting, just because when we get into the non-consensual space, there's a whole trauma piece that's a very different piece to handle. If your first time was miserable and you don't take the time to figure out, like, why didn't I like that? Or what didn't I like? Or like, what could have been better? And then you don't learn to figure out what it is that you like. We don't come with owner's manuals, even for ourselves. Like, it'd be great if we had a manual that we could give a partner and be like, read this, you'll figure out where to touch me. But if we don't even know what we like, how do we communicate that to a partner? And so for some people, their first time may be miserable, but if they spend time like really like, well, why was that miserable? What didn't I like? What do I like? Like, do I know my body enough to know what I like? And do I want to do some self-exploration? And do I want to find partners who are willing to listen more or engage in different behaviors? It can change. It's not like you have a horrible first experience and that's going to be your life pattern. And it's one of the greatest things I'm seeing with the younger generations is that they're more likely to speak up and say, this, like, here's what I need, here are my boundaries. Whereas when I work with people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, especially women, they were never given permission to vocalize that way. So I do see that generational gap, but I don't want people out there thinking, oh, well, my first 1 or 5 experiences were miserable, so that's going to be the rest of my sex life. It doesn't have to be. You just going to have to do a little work there on yourself to figure out what is it I want and how do I communicate it? And how do I set a boundary where if you're not doing the things I need, then this isn't working for me. And that can be really difficult.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like, if we know that our happiness is in our hands through a change of perspective or perception and how we view something, I think oftentimes, like for me, I had a hard time having orgasm. The big O did not come till like 2 years ago. Not going to lie. And I thought, I was podcasting a long time ago and I was talking with a yoni practitioner in Australia who dealt with using yoni stones and energy work to release trauma. And they can't do that type of work here in the United States. It's not legal yet. It's physically. But anyway, so that being said, she was telling me that, what was it? Oh, that she said oftentimes women think that they can't orgasm. And I thought that something's wrong with me. So so we get to this defeatist, my identity is this, and we stay there instead of being a problem solver and it's not necessarily our fault in the Generation X and the boomer generation, all that, like, because we were told not to ask. It was not okay. But now go ahead. Sorry.
No, and our sexual experiences from like people right now in their mid 40s and up, the sexual experiences for women were about male pleasure. If assuming it was a male-female relationship,
right.
They were taught that it wasn't about them. It was about their male partner. And so they have a lifetime of like what they've been taught to undo. So there is that. What we do find in same gender relationships is sometimes they do still struggle with some of this because they didn't learn that language. So it's not just about a man and a woman having sex. We do sometimes see this with 2 women who are sexually active, that they're not always so great at saying like, here's what I need you to do, or touch me here, but it may be easier for them to broach that conversation. So I don't want to just blaming the men for it, but for for a lot of generations, women women were taught that the focus was not their own pleasure, but the pleasure of the men that they were with.
Yes, I've talked about this on one of my past episodes. It's like, oh, I remember the metaphor. This doctor was talking about, it's like the metaphor for sex used to be around a baseball field, and women were kind of the catchers, or one of the partners, we'll say, was kind of the catcher. And then the one who was hitting gets all the way to home base, and they're the one who scores. And so it was all about pleasing and, this one person's self-sacrifice, so it's crazy.
Yeah. I've had women come up to me. Before COVID, I did a lot of speaking in the community, and I'd have women coming up to me and being like, I'm not orgasming the right way. And I'm like, I didn't know there was a right way. like what way are you orgasming? They could reach orgasm on their own through masturbation, but they couldn't do it with their partner. And they're like, so something's broken. I'm like, no, your body is obviously functioning the way you want it to, because you're able to reach orgasm on your own. But we tend to forget to tell them that it's okay to kind of learn that part on their own, and then hopefully tell their partners, but that there's no right or wrong way to have an orgasm. If you're experiencing it, that's great. How do we get you to experience it more across different situations? But I mean, I've had people just absolutely like, there's something wrong with me because I can't orgasm with my partner. I'm like,
yeah, that was me.
Yeah, it's probably not you. It's probably the communication between you and your partner. Yeah.
Well, that's what I had to explore myself sexually. And that was like, just to give you guys how I did it. And how you do it will be yours, but it aligns with what you're saying, Dr. Sue, is I already explored myself through self-gratification. And I knew how to do that like that. But on the more inner worlds of things, I still, even for myself, had a harder time. So I was lucky enough to find a partner that I felt safe with, that we actually, I am, I think it's demisexual. I need that connection, whether it's just the season I am in my life from trauma or whatever it is I need that. And so I had that. I felt safe with this person. And so I felt comfortable being naked because of work I did on me. There's shame around nudity. It felt so vulnerable to me. There was religious shame, cultural shame, and I've done so much work. So this person, I'm like, okay, being naked. I'm laying there. I was able to relax. And from there, I was able to discover with this person, but I already did a lot of self-discovery and healing on my own. But I knew I was ready. Like, I heard these women could have orgasms. And then when I finally did, I was like, I mean, it's great, but where I'm at now is I still prefer the outside. Like, it's still more pleasurable. And so it wasn't this big thing in the movies where it's like, sploosh.
People think it's going to be like this huge earth shattering, and it can be. I mean, some women who have their first orgasm, especially if it's been a hot minute since they've had one, it really can be kind of a life-changing experience. But really, it's about that connection for a lot of folks. And it's like what you were saying, it's that trust, it's that ability to be naked, and like being naked and having the lights on with a partner is super vulnerable. And so if you can't do that, like, how do you even tell your partner, like, this doesn't feel good, or I'm kind of over this, or I need you to touch something else, or can we try a toy? Or so if you can't be vulnerable and you can't have that communication, how can you expect your body to relax and enjoy itself if your brain can't relax and enjoy itself?
Yeah, you're still in logic.
Yeah.
You're just like, it's survival mode.
Yeah.
And that's I think for me, it was finding a certain type of partner, learning that because of the experience I've had and the programming I still resonate with, I knew I had to talk to someone, get to know them, let them know my vulnerable insecurities about my body, a little bit of oversharing. But for me, it made me feel comfortable because it was like them saying, I accept that. I'm okay with that insecurity you had. And I think, like, with your first time experience, I mean, imagine this is the first partner you're naked in front of, and US culture where nudity is linked to sexuality.
And you may not even be naked. It may just be moving enough clothes out of the way.
True.
Like if you're in a car, like it can just be sometimes moving enough clothes out of the way to do what you have to do as quickly as you can, so you do not get caught. And because you're nervous. Yeah, there's a whole lot there. Like, most people's first time experiences are rushed. There's not a lot of focus on like attention to what's going on. And for a lot of them, it's built up, sort of like your story, like this whole like build up to it, like having a playlist and it was going to be this big. And it's almost like setting a standard that neither of you can meet because you've built it up to be like this huge thing. So there's a lot that we put around that first time that can kind of doom us to failure before we even start. So
and that's a pattern of mine for sure in many areas of my life. I put things on pedestals that my partners don't even know about. But yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things we need to think about, especially with that first time, I mean, I was talking to some folks about kind of what their experiences were, and no one was willing to tell me their story at first because it was shameful. And they were embarrassed by telling me the story. And part of it was because it was a sexual story. And I try to maintain boundaries with my friends about what we talk about.
Right.
Just because I do this for a living doesn't mean my friends want to talk to me about it. But we had been having conversation and they were really embarrassed because it didn't go well. And I'm like, and I kept trying to say, well, that's a theme I've been hearing. And so they would get into it and say that they felt like really unprepared. And then they were angry because they're like, this big moment.
I'll never get back.
I'll never get it back. And it should have been something different. And why didn't I know these things? And I had one person who was like, porn didn't prepare me well. And I'm like, probably not. But yeah, we have people have these experiences and then it's very shameful or they regret it, but it's also something they don't talk about. And so they kind of live with that. And that becomes a problem for me because if you can't talk about the things that happened and you can't talk about how it's impacting you now, you're just going to keep repeating some of that same cycle.
See, that's what I was kind of trying to tap into earlier. I was like, is there like something that will cast a shadow amongst your experiences? Because if you're holding resentment towards the experience itself, then that carries on some level.
And if you stay with that first partner, like the third story where the person was married, if there's no conversation about it afterwards, it's just going to be the same thing. It's just going to be lather, rinse, repeat. Like we're just going to keep doing the same thing. She obviously wasn't happy with it. But if there's no like, hey, we need to try something, like this was good, but it could be great, or can we try a different position or any conversation about it? But if there's none, it's just going to be this repeat of this experience that wasn't wonderful. And that's where it starts becoming a habit.
Yeah. And I mean, even like past the first time, if someone was stuck on this, my first time was this, I wish it was different. Okay, that's fine. You didn't get the Christmas present you wish you got from Santa. All right, awesome. But it's like, how often is every experience you have with sex this Bon Jovi Bed of Roses experience? Even when you're married, sometimes the roses have wilted. There's a long day at work, but you're horny. You decide to do it. Was it as good as when he went on vacation for work or she went on vacation for work and came back because there was tension built? No, it's not the same, but it's an experience.
Yeah. And I think it's a thing we need to think about when we talk about sex is that it's not always going to be this. For some people, it's not always going to be like this deep emotional bond. For some people, it might be. But for some people, it's about I was horny or I was bored or like my partner wanted to do it and I was only half in the mood. Or, if we can stop looking at like every sexual act has to be this monumental life-changing experience and just see it as a, hey, that was really fun. Like, or, hey, that was a great way to blow off steam. Or, hey, like now I'm not as angry at you. Some people don't bond well over angry sex.
I do.
Yeah, some people.
I love it.
It's so fascinating because for some people they'll have sex as a way of making up, and then for other people they have to make up before they can be close and intimate with their partner again. But sometimes it's not even about your partner; it's just about the fact like I'm horny, I'm bored, I just want to have sex. So I think if we stop thinking about sex as every time we do it, it has to be this big magical Disney moment, and just appreciate for what it was. Like, okay, maybe that wasn't the greatest, but like there were some great moments there, or my partner's really happy, or I feel a little bit better about myself. Like it can be so many things, but it doesn't have to be all the things all the time.
See, I love that. And that's, we live in a more culture and I definitely was born into that. And, I think like that fantasy of it needs to check all the boxes or, but like, yeah, it needs to be adjusted because your expectation, you will be let down. And then there's resentments, then there's bitterness, then there's endings where there could have been new beginnings in that relationship. But what I find interesting, you just said, was like people having sex when they're bored, having sex when they're angry. I did, my last partner and I, and he's already given me permission to bring him up as an example, just so, put a comment below, hon. But anyways, so it was interesting because he was, I think like we all maybe could open up a little bit, like, but he was one that he needed the emotional connection to feel safe. And so after a fight, it was the last thing he wanted to do. After an argument, I was like, it was like my Xanax. I was like, I want this. So I would say, you're wrong. No, you're wrong, because we're different in that season of our life. And so I just, it's so fascinating to me. I just learned something, that people are just different, and it doesn't mean they're bad or they're wrong.
And that's going to also play into that first sexual experience, because for some, it's going to be like, okay, this is the moment that brings us together, and now we're going to be a couple forever. And the other person may be thinking like, all right, cool, like on to the next. Like that was what I needed to get to with this partner. And so when they don't talk about what that first sexual experience may mean, and again, it's hard to have that conversation. I do this for a living, and it is education for a living. I feel like I need to clarify that. I do education for a living, and it is still hard sometimes for me in my personal life to have those conversations with partners, because you never know how it's going to be taken. And if you're young and having your first time, or if you're completely sexually inexperienced getting married and it's your first time, you don't know how to speak up for yourself. You don't know how to have those conversations. But that idea that people are different, even for first time, they're going into it thinking something different. Like some people maybe just be like, I just don't want to be a virgin anymore. So let's just get it over with. And that's going to be it. And I could tell my friends I had sex, and they'll stop making fun of me. And then some people are like, oh, this is our thing, and now we're together forever, and we're joined in spirit. And the other person's like, and I'm done. Thanks. So I think it's important to keep that in mind too. And there's no conversation about it beforehand often. Like, what does this mean for us? Does this mean like,
do we align and the vision we have for this experience?
Right. And if you're young, you don't have that language. You don't have that language when you're 17, 18, 19. So, and even some people in their 20s don't know how to have that conversation.
Well, this was cool. It's like there's shows like this, and there's more experts like you getting out there publicly to leaking into mainstream. Like, the more we get out there and we're not being pushed out, we're not being blocked from speaking out and getting the information age to these people who are 16, who are 15, who are whatever age. And it's allowed to be talked about, because that's a huge one. I know you've dealt with this personally. I won't go into whatever you don't want to, but you have so much wisdom, and we're blocked.
Yeah, I know we talked about this when we spoke last time. So one of the things that I do for my Hey Dr. Sue is I record it on YouTube. And I have been censored on YouTube for talking about sex openly. And so luckily in YouTube's defense, when I did file an appeal, they did undo the block. But the fact that I have a PhD in this, like, this is what I do for a living, and we can't get the information out, and people are being blocked. But then people who don't know what they're talking about can say whatever they want, and they're not being blocked. It means that people are getting bad information when they're getting information at all, and that's a problem.
That's a problem. Yeah. I'm just waiting to be blocked.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, how is this the episode, Dr. Sue? Is this the episode?
I do that every week when I hit publish on YouTube. I like wait for my email to ding and be like, your video was pulled down. So yeah, it's a little bit nerve-wracking, but hopefully we don't get censored. And hopefully people are out there learning that, like, yes, your first time can be scary and it can be a little nerve-wracking, but maybe if you can have a conversation, maybe if you can make sure your body feels prepared and your mind feels prepared, maybe it doesn't have to be so scary.
Oh, no, I agree. And it's, that's why I came up with this thing where I'm like, for our show, I was like, I'll have like a part of the show, we'll keep it clinical, we'll keep it clean-ish. we'll talk about whatever. But like people need this information. So it's like, we'll transfer to Spotify. We'll get over to Patreon because then it's unfiltered. And so you guys don't give up because there is information out there, and it's not education. Just talking to Dr. Sue, like on the phone and here, it doesn't have to be boring. It could be really fun learning about your body. And I know communication. I do it with partners. I communicate before sex. I communicate before the first date, oftentimes, what I like sexually. I've made it a fun conversation for me. And it's like when you can normalize it in your nervous system, it's amazing. The people are giving me feedback like, wow, they feel safe now.
But how do you do that? How do you learn to do that when you're younger and inexperienced and don't have the language and everything about what you're seeing on TV, music, movies? It's all telling you that this first time is going to be scary and you should just get through it and get it over. So how do we get that message out to folks about how to make this experience?
Good question.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. How do we get that message out, especially when the message is getting filtered? And all they're hearing is what's in popular culture and what the message is about it being, it's supposed to hurt, that it's supposed to hurt and it's supposed to be uncomfortable. And like, well, how do we start challenging that if we get censored even raising the question?
Well, we're going to have to get really creative like they do in therapy with puppets and dolls. We're going to have to get to metaphors and it'd be like, so Sally, the little doll, Raggedy Ann, we'll do Raggedy Ann. Well, she wanted to, share one of her buttons with Raggedy Andy. What do you do? But anyways, well, Dr. Sue, how do people find you if they want to get in contact with you, to ask you questions, to find help?
Yeah, so I'm all over. I'm not on TikTok, though my students keep yelling at me that I should be. They can find me on Instagram at Hey Dr. Sue. They can find me on Twitter. They can find my website. I don't know if we'll be including that information. But if you go to the website, there'll be a link that you can just submit an anonymous question. And I answer one question every Sunday. And I'll push it out onto Medium, Facebook, Instagram. I know Facebook for the older folks. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. So once a week, everything goes out. Sorry, not live. It goes out.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure, everybody, that I post Dr. Sue's website below so that you can possibly have the chance to have one of your questions answered by this fabulous woman right here. Thank you so much, Dr. Sue, for reading some Pop My Cherry stories.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully we'll get some great response and we can do this again.
This would be fun. All right. Well, guys, thank you. And keep it red. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks for joining the Life in Red today, where we embrace passion, confidence, and positive sexuality. Keep painting your journey in bold red strokes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us so that you never miss out on living your best red life. Ready for more? Stay passionate, stay red. See you next episode.